Well, teachers, hello and welcome. You're here because you are likely also interested in doing something about joining up teacher wellbeing and professional development. The general philosophy here is that just like with our learners, when we feel well, we are more likely to teach and learn well. In other words, well teachers teach well. So let's get started. In this episode, I'm going to be sharing 7 mistakes and lessons learned from the worst workshop I ever delivered and why this was the most important point of my career in facilitation. So, a few years ago, I received a work email. It said, "There's a conference coming up and we'd like you to present a certain segment for it." When I got this, I felt nervous but also excited because this was a conference not just for teachers but for professionals and colleagues in the publishing industry at the company I was working with. So this came at a time when I was just beginning to pivot into training and facilitation more full-time, and I was really excited for this opportunity. I had just been starting to deliver good workshops for teachers and enjoying it and having some success there. So I thought this would be a lot of fun too. And my creative juices started to flow as I started to think about how I would deliver this workshop. And this here led to one of my first mistakes, and that was not really fully grasping that the audience I was about to present to were not teachers. So I missed the point that this would not be quite a straightforward task as I thought it would be. Professionals in corporate are a completely different audience to teachers working in schools. The whole needs, the vibe, the engagement, mechanics, all the pain points are very different. And so this was also a very high pressure workshop because it was a presentation for the entire business unit of the organization I worked with. I share this because this misunderstanding of the audience was a fundamental first mistake that I made before I even began to prepare for the session. And as you'll hear about in the next parts of this episode, I made several other huge mistakes from the planning right through to the delivery and even a little bit in how I handled the whole thing afterwards. So in this episode, let's move in now to going through some of the various blunders that took place during the session. And hold tight because there are a few. I've got 7 here that I'm going to go through with you. So we'll do a blunder followed by a lesson. So the first blunder was this pandemonium that happened once I had decided to bring dates from Dubai into this workshop. So we had decided we would give these as gifts and rewards for activities and things like that. And I just remember at the point where these dates came out, I'd left them on the stage where I thought they would be handy for me to be able to get to them quickly and distribute. But in fact, as the session became more and more chaotic, some colleagues came up and ran up to the stage and took these dates and started distributing them at the wrong time. And so this really happened, and I couldn't believe it. At one point during the session, there was total chaos because people were, talking about whether they wanted to eat a date or not. And they weren't really doing the activities at all. And it was really hard to get everybody reeled back in. So that was a blunder. And the lesson that I learned from it was keep reward objects away from view or access in big workshops. In lessons in general, you kind of need to be a little bit guarded about anything you're wanting to distribute. I definitely learned that lesson from this experience. So the second blunder that I made was I had not checked with the presenters and presentations due before and after this workshop. So there were participants in my workshop who were they'd been sitting for 2 hours listening to other workshops, and I didn't realize that the one before my session was going to be giving them chocolates at the end of their workshop. So they really weren't interested in the dates anyway. It became a really non-event when we got these beautiful, delicious dates from Dubai that I thought everybody would be really enjoying. Everybody was already sugared up, so it just didn't really work in that context either. So that was the blunder, and the lesson learned is don't operate in a vacuum. Make sure you check and really get to know the presenters and the presentation content and plans before and after yours, so that you can be considerate about what your participants are going to be experiencing. On to blunder number 3. I decided that it would be a great idea for all of the team to get involved, to share a little bit about their experience regarding the topic. And I thought it would be amazing to have the entire team from across the whole region involved in the presentation. And this was a mistake, because not only had I not had a chance to really touch base with people because we were all busy and we're all in different locations, it was really hard to get everybody together more than once to prepare for this. It was just too many people. The risks that come when you get more and more people involved is a lot like that saying, when you're cooking, too many cooks spoil the broth. Too many presenters creates chaos if you're not really prepared for everything. So the potential for chaos increases exponentially the more people you get involved to deliver presentations. It becomes a little bit also like herding cats, because you're asking a large group of people to be standing up, and we hadn't practiced in this room before, so we didn't really know where we would be standing. So the other problem with you leading on something where you've invited lots of people to be involved is that the more people get involved, the more people get confused, the more people you're going to be having coming up to you, asking you what's going on when you're also panicking. So it's really not a great idea if you're going to be delivering a presentation to involve so many people if you can't really truly prepare properly with them beforehand. So the lesson is that the more people you involve, the more planning you need, and the more potential for chaos you should prepare for. So the 4th blunder is starting late and not accounting for the time I needed to transition from the workshops before to the workshops after. And this is something that really affects teaching as well. So when you teach in a back-to-back schedule in a school or in a lesson, this is something that you will definitely get affected by. So you will plan this amazing, beautiful, wonderful lesson for 45 minutes. And then while it gets into flow, you won't realize that you need 10 minutes to get the bodies of everybody into the room and onto the seats and into place. And sometimes you need to even move people around and change the whole setting up a bit. So this is, a fundamental blunder that I made. I did not account for the time I needed to transition from the workshop before to the workshop after. So the lesson here was just the physical transitions. Really, I didn't pay enough attention to how much time this would need from me. So factor in transition time, Sumbala. Factor in margin, factor in space for organizing equipment and setup. That was a big lesson that I learned, and I always factor in margin now whenever I'm trying to prepare a workshop, a lesson, anything like that. Even if it's 5 minutes and I'm not even sure what the initial part will involve, it's really nice to have just that space, It really helps with time management too. So, on to the next blunder. I was delivering something on a primary theme, and this was the topic of the course book that we'd been presenting on. I actually didn't get the right tone for the professionals at the workshop. So even though it was primary themed, the product, it probably would have been ideal for teachers, the tone I set this workshop at, but it wasn't the right tone for busy sales professionals, colleagues in a corporate setting. So I'd made a couple of activities that were really suitable for teachers and very cute as well because they were primary themed, but they just didn't hit the mark with this audience, and I could see people zoning out. I could see them sighing, some twiddling their thumbs. It was the total opposite of what I had hoped for in such a workshop. The lesson I learned here was that just because an activity works for one audience It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for another. And the audience and understanding them and knowing the kind of things that will resonate with them is so, so important before you start going about designing activities based on an audience that you're more comfortable with. This is also something that I made mistakes on when I started to transition from teaching students to teaching professionals and adults. Just because some activities work well with young learners and with students, it really doesn't mean that you're going to be able to stand up and be as great with teaching adults or facilitating workshops for adults. So really, really important point, this one. Just because an activity works for one audience doesn't mean it will work for another. Number 6 of 7 is a blunder that I made about PowerPoint slides. I chose not to use slides, and this really threw everybody off. And I, at the time, was going through a phase where I was really trying to push myself with my teacher training workshops to get off of death by PowerPoint and to get away from slides. And I was in a very extreme frame of mind where I was not wanting to use slides at all. I recognize that this was actually really not a good approach to take, especially in this type of workshop. So this was a big group, over 60 people, and in reality, not having slides just led to utter confusion, because in such a huge group, in such a huge conference hall, having a single slide even with the instructions on it would have been extremely helpful in terms of providing an anchor point in reducing chaos. After the pandemic, I became very, very nuanced and detailed in how and when I use lots of slides. And just because I see 50 slides in a deck doesn't mean I will necessarily criticize it. I will always now look for context and purpose and how quickly you're going to be moving through the slides and using the slides. So this is one of the reasons, I will never really dismiss PowerPoint outright. And nor do I promote anti-PowerPoint anymore. There is just so much nuance in how you facilitate that you may find something works somewhere else in a different context. So the biggest blunder I did, I think, with PowerPoint in this was that I didn't use it. And if I had had at least one slide anchoring everybody, there would have been a lot less chaos and confusion, given that I had involved so many other colleagues and there were so many different types of professionals in this workshop. That's the lesson there. Do not let fear of death by PowerPoint stop you from using slides. They all have their purpose. Moving on to number 7. This one is a post-workshop note to self. So you can beat yourself up after a bad workshop or a bad lesson a little bit. Don't hurt yourself. But remember that people are forgiving, and that what's bad for you, it might not be that way for others. So after this workshop, it was a mistake. I really did beat myself up about this presentation for far, far too long. I was really upset about it. I let it affect my mood, my emotions. I felt really awkward. I actually wanted to leave the conference. I didn't want to stay. I felt really embarrassed. Having to go on and do and participate in the rest of the conference, feeling like a train wreck, I just wanted the ground to swallow me up, and basically I cringed my way through the rest of the conference, hoping that everybody would forget. But another lesson here on this is that I notice people are actually very forgiving, especially in teams, especially healthy teams. And what may have been a really epic, colossal mess for you, in your view, it could have been fascinating for someone else. It could have been a non-event for someone else still. But this point here, the last point on 7, this blunder about beating myself up, this leads me to the reason why I really feel it was the most important workshop I ever delivered. And I think it's because it was uncomfortable, and it became a critical kind of point in my whole career in facilitation, really. On this point, before we summarize these 7 nuggets of lessons that came out of this big blunder of a workshop, I will say that all talent is earned in the trenches. So crashing this workshop was really important because it was here that I decided that it was going to be in the trenches of facilitation that I would stay. And I really am so glad that I stayed in it, that I dug through. And there are lots of things that helped me out of this. And I'm going to be sharing them in this series so that we can continue to dive into this whole, the trenches of facilitation. But for now, let's go on and summarize these lessons and then finish up with some updates. So to summarize this episode, I shared 7 blunders, and those lessons coming out of those blunders were to keep reward objects away from viewer access in workshops, to always meet and check with presenters and presentations due before or after yours, to remember that the more people you have involved, the more potential for chaos you invite in, to remember that factoring in transition or margin for just movement and setup is important in any lesson or workshop, and to remember that just because an activity works for one audience doesn't mean it will for another. To not let fear of death by PowerPoint stop you from using slides. They have their purpose. And then to beat yourself up if you need to a little bit. Don't hurt yourself, but to remember people are forgiving and what's bad for you may not be for others, and there's wisdom in it. So over to you in the comments or in the LinkedIn messages, wherever you're feeling comfortable to reach out to me. I'd love you to join in with this themed learning journey by reflecting on some of your lessons or workshops or even presentations, and think of a time when something failed or it didn't go well, and let me know how you got through it and what you learned from it. I'd love to know. That brings us to the end of this episode. So imagine, if you will, a jingle, and I will share with you now some updates. So, from the land of well teachers, I have been spending the last little time fleshing out the platform for well teachers more, and also preparing for an upcoming workshop on metacognition for members. We'll also have our month-end wellbeing session coming up because we are speeding through April now. And these are for members only, and it's a closed membership right now. So to stay updated with news about when I will be opening it up again, or when you can join in and be part of this with me, you can receive updates first if you are part of the email list. So the way that I do things is typically social media is the last place things are announced. Pretty much everyone who joined the membership right now joined because they caught on before it was even announced. So they received the emails and they were able to join this way. So do consider signing up to that. I send roundups of good things going on long before they reach any podcasts or social media announcements. And now a personal update. So I am, as you may know, based in Chitral right now. I am recording this for you from the mountains. I can see them in front of me with beautiful trees, and it is Eid these days. So Ramadan has just ended and I'm about to take a short break in Mastuj, which is even further up, deeper into the mountains of Chitral. I'm really excited. I've never been there before, so I'm really looking forward to it. At the moment, a fun fact is that the internet here is extremely slow, so it probably took several hours for me to get this episode uploaded for you. Surprisingly, I found this slow internet quite helpful in terms of becoming more efficiently with creative work, so it's been a bit of a shift in terms of how I've been working. That's a story for another time. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know, and I'm wishing you a great rest of your week. That's it for now. Bye.